Okay, let's unpack this. Take a look around, or maybe just scroll through your phone for a minute.
Yeah.
We live in a world just utterly saturated with images of wealth, right?
Mhm.
Luxury cars, designer clothes, these amazing trips.
It's everywhere.
There's this constant feed, this pressure almost to show your success.
And it creates this really interesting paradox, doesn't it? Because alongside all that noise, all that showing off,
Mm-hmm.
there's this kind of growing counterculture.
Hmm.
People who have built, significant financial resources, but they choose to live these quiet, low-key lives.
Right.
They prioritize discretion over display. So this deep dive is really about understanding that contrast,
Hmm.
the impulse to show off versus maybe the wisdom of keeping your financial success private.
Exactly. And we're not just defining terms today. We're going deep into why that instinct to display wealth might actually be counterproductive.
Uh-huh.
Not just for true success, but maybe even for happiness and security. And we're drawing insights directly from the source material you brought.
Yeah, and to really get it,
Oh.
we have to go back,
Yeah.
like way back.
Okay.
This idea of conspicuous consumption, it comes from Thorstein Veblen back in 1899.
Wow. Okay. That old?
Yeah. It's the idea of buying and using luxury goods specifically to show off your wealth and your status. And the sources are clear. This is not new. Not at all.
Right.
They mention examples like Mark Antony and his, get this, custom-made chariots.
Huh. Custom chariots. So signaling status with fancy stuff has a very long history.
A very long history. You could say the historical struggle for existence, as Veblen put it, sort of evolved into a struggle for wealth.
Uh-huh.
And showing off your property, your possessions, became the key way to gain respect and honor in society.
Okay, so that's the showing off part. What about the other side?
Right, so quiet wealth, or you sometimes hear stealth wealth,
Mm-hmm.
that's the direct opposite of that historical drive.
Okay.
It's the intentional practice of keeping your financial success, well, under wraps. It means choosing a low-key lifestyle, prioritizing discretion.
Why, though? What's the core motivation?
According to the sources, it's about building financial security without the need for external validation. That's the key phrase.
So instead of spending money to impress other people, you're directing it towards what? Investments, savings?
Exactly. Or personal well-being, experiences,
Yeah.
things that build your life, your actual life, not just your image.
That makes sense.
True wealth, in this view, it's really about freedom. The freedom to choose how you spend your most valuable resources, your time, your energy, who you spend it with.
Yeah. It's not about how big your house is or the car in the driveway.
Not fundamentally, no.
It's probably worth quickly mentioning the difference between stealth wealth and quiet luxury, too, right? Because you hear both terms thrown around.
That's a good point. Stealth wealth is fundamentally about hiding your financial resources, like really aiming for apparent normality.
Trying to blend in.
Totally. Quiet luxury is a bit different. It's more about discreetly enjoying high-quality, often expensive items, but for their intrinsic value.
So you appreciate the craftsmanship or the materials.
Right. Not the flashy logo or the status it's supposed to project.
Yeah.
The focus is on personal enjoyment, the inherent quality, not public display.
Got it. And this whole dynamic, showing off versus keeping quiet, it gets amplified like crazy in the modern world, doesn't it? Social media.
Oh, absolutely. Platforms like Instagram, they become these huge public showcases of wealth.
Yeah.
They actively encourage sharing this carefully curated reality, which often leads to false representations of achievement.
And influencers play a huge role.
A massive role. The sources note they have remarkable power in shaping consumer behavior, driving purchasing decisions, especially for younger generations.
And that creates this kind of cycle, right? Perceived authenticity online gets linked to displayed luxury.
Which then pushes more people to consume a display because they feel that pressure to keep up.
Yeah, that pressure.
Exactly. Social media doesn't just show wealth, it fundamentally shapes the perception of what wealth and success even mean, often equating visibility with validity.
It's an illusory world, as the sources put it.
Yeah, nudging people towards prioritizing the symbol of affluence over the actual substance of genuine financial security.
It really sounds like commercial interests are tapping into something deep in our psychology here.
They absolutely are. As the sources put it, this isn't just reflecting desires that are already there. Platforms and marketers actively cultivate and amplify insecurity and FOMO, fear of missing out,
Oh.
by constantly presenting these aspirational, often frankly unattainable lifestyles. It can feel like a systemic issue where commercial interests just prioritize surface appearances and ultimately profit, over actual well-being.
Which can trap people, presumably.
Totally. They're driven by these psychological needs, but they end up engaging in financially risky behavior, impulse buying, overspending.
All in what the sources call a futile attempt to get that fleeting external validation.
That's the dynamic we really need to explore today, the psychology driving it, the very real costs, the alternative wisdom in being discreet, and even how cultural background shapes all of this, all based on the sources you brought for this deep dive.
Okay, let's dive deeper into that first piece then, the psychology. Why do we feel this urge, this need sometimes, to display wealth?
We started with Veblen and conspicuous consumption.
Right, this unnecessary consumption of expensive products, specifically for signaling wealth.
Okay.
And it's rooted in something he called pecuniary emulation.
Pecuniary emulation. Well, what's that exactly?
It's basically where people, even those with fewer resources, copy the spending habits of wealthier individuals. They hope to gain similar perceived status or respect.
Like keeping up with the Joneses, but maybe more deeply ingrained.
Yeah, and historically, think about those examples. Displaying a large quantity of women, slaves, horses, and booty, or those custom chariots.
Right, clear status signals.
Exactly. The shift to property as the main signal changed what was displayed, but the basic drive to emulate, to copy the successful, remained.
But dig a little deeper. The sources seem to point to something even more fundamental underneath that emulation, right?
They absolutely do. A core drive is the basic human need for social validation.
People display achievements, possessions, whatever, as a way to boost their self-esteem and worth, to feel important and respected by others.
And here's where it gets really interesting, for me anyway. The sources don't stop there. They highlight how this often serves to mask a deeper insecurity.
Yes. Psychology suggests these displays frequently stem from deeply rooted insecurity, a feeling that they need to prove their worth through materialistic displays.
Thinking it brings genuine respect.
Right, but wrongly believing that. It's often linked, fundamentally, to a lack of self-esteem and self-respect.
Wow. So the very behavior that's supposed to fix the insecurity seeking external validation through showing off actually makes it worse.
It perpetuates and exacerbates it, according to the analysis. External validation is temporary by nature. Material goods bring only fleeting satisfaction, that underlying psychological emptiness. It just remains.
It sounds like a truly endless cycle.
It is an insatiable need, a relentless pursuit of external approval. The sources describe it as detrimental. There is no end.
So flaunting isn't usually a sign of real confidence.
Often, it's a symptom of unmet psychological needs. It's a cycle that drains finances and well-being without ever delivering lasting satisfaction.
And materialism ties directly into this, right? That belief that physical possessions and material comforts are more important than other things.
Like values, relationships, personal growth.
Yeah. It's basically attempting to meet higher level psychological needs. Think esteem, belongingness on Maslow's hierarchy with material goods.
But it doesn't work.
The sources are really clear. This only brings fleeting satisfaction. It doesn't meet those deeper psychological needs for connection, purpose, and meaning.
It can even be a way to compensate.
Yeah, a form of compensation for unmet safety needs, sometimes described as a neurotic need, rooted in that core insecurity we talked about.
And that fuels the classic keeping up with the Joneses.
Absolutely. Social comparison theory. We evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves to others. Now throw social media into the mix with its carefully curated images of seemingly perfect lives. And you get massive feelings of inadequacy, envy.
Which then drives that relentless desire to keep up with the Joneses. Comparing yourself upwards, especially financially, can automatically create what the sources call a debt-inducing norm.
Leading potentially to economic ruin. Wow.
And FOMO, fear of missing out, amplified hugely by social media and advertising, is just a powerful engine driving this competitive consumption.
Behavioral economics offers some extra layers here too, doesn't it? Biases that explain some irrational spending.
It does. Concepts like loss aversion, where the pain of losing, say, $100 feels way worse than the pleasure of gaining $100.
Right.
Or the endowment effect, where we tend to value something more just because we happen to own it. The sources point out these biases could help explain why we often overspend and accumulate possessions that we don't actually need or even want.
These biases kind of push us towards financially unsound decisions.
They definitely contribute.
And then there's this really intriguing sociological concept, the cargo cult mentality applied to consumerism. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It originally described groups, often in Melanesia after WWII, who saw Westerners receive goods cargo, seemingly from the sky.
Okay.
So they started imitating the actions they associated with receiving these goods. Things like building makeshift airstrips or radio towers out of wood and vines, hoping planes would land and bring them cargo too.
Wow, so they were imitating the process, hoping to get the goal.
Exactly. They mistook the rituals for the cause. And the sources suggest the desire for material wealth and adopting Western consumer culture can be seen as a continuation of the cargo cult mentality.
How so?
People imitate the symbols of wealth, buying the luxury items, the designer labels confusing the process for the goal.
So the goal being happiness, success, belonging.
Right. You buy the expensive handbag or the fancy car that's the symbol of the runway, hoping it automatically delivers the happiness or the status, the cargo.
Without necessarily addressing the underlying reasons for wanting it or actually building true security.
Precisely. And importantly, the sources frame this not just as some individual failing. They note that ordinary organizational practices often foster a culture of neuroticism and can systematically instill in the public counterproductive habits.
So like marketing and media.
Modern marketing, especially on social media, actively cultivates and amplifies these psychological vulnerabilities for profit. It's presented as almost a system that teaches people to equate the display of certain items with genuine success.
Often at the expense of real financial freedom and mental health.
Yeah, the pursuit of external markers gets normalized, becomes the expected thing.
Okay, so moving from the why to the what happens next. Flaunting wealth has some really significant harmful consequences that the sources detail. Let's start with the purely financial risks.
This might seem obvious, but the math is pretty stark when you look at it. Luxury items, they just depreciate rapidly.
Like how rapidly?
Well, designer clothes can lose 50–80% of their value immediately, just like that. High fashion keeps losing 20–30% annually after that initial hit.
And cars are famously bad.
Oh, they're notorious. A new luxury car typically loses 20–30% of its value in the first year alone.
A third of its value, gone.
Gone. And then it keeps dropping 15–18% annually after that. These are assets often without even thinking about their declining cost per use.
And the opportunity cost, that's massive. That money spent on something that's just plummeting in value.
Is money not invested?
Right.
Money not growing. The sources give this really powerful example. Losing, say, $60,000 in value on a $100,000 car over 5 years.
Okay.
If that same $60,000 had just been invested conservatively, maybe earning 8% annually,
Yeah.
it could have grown to roughly $88,000 in 5 years.
That is a huge difference. That's wealth you could have built, just gone.
Diverted away from growth. And even seemingly small things like impulsive buys or stuff like lottery tickets, they have a constantly negative expected value. Mathematically, you're almost certain to lose in the long run.
And the pressure, that social pressure to keep up with the displays, it pushes people into debt.
Into constantly borrowing, putting them at serious risk of economic ruin. It's a pretty direct path towards getting trapped.
Okay, so the financial risks are clear. What about the psychological and emotional costs?
These are arguably even more significant. Research consistently shows people who prioritize materialism report lower levels of overall satisfaction with their lives.
Really? Less happy.
Yeah. The constant pursuit of possessions can lead to anxiety and stress. It's exhausting.
And because flaunting often comes from that place of insecurity we talked about?
Right. Seeking external validation this way is never a lasting cure. The sources suggest people who display wealth often experience difficulty forming genuine, meaningful connections.
Why is that?
Maybe it's hard to trust people's motives. Or maybe the focus is just elsewhere. They also report are never satisfied, feeling this insatiable need for more for the next thing.
That sounds awful.
That relentless search for external approval is detrimental. There is no end. The sheer pressure to maintain an image and constantly chase approval takes a huge toll on people's mental well-being.
It's a real paradox then. Trying to project this image of success through external stuff actually undermines your genuine internal security and well-being.
Exactly. The cost goes far beyond monetary value. It hits your mental health, your personal satisfaction.
And what about socially? How does it affect relationships and safety?
Well, displaying wealth can definitely attract unwanted attention. The sources explicitly warn of financial predators, excessive social expectations, and unnecessary stress.
Predators like who?
Scammers, extortionists, people who might want to deceive you or even impersonate you.
Yeah.
Or just, users, people drawn to your money or status.
That sounds dangerous.
It can lead to toxic situations where you are taken advantage of. And it's not just strangers. It can create distance, even with genuine friends.
Wow.
They may begin to envy your newfound lifestyle or maybe avoid you out of fear of feeling inferior. This can lead straight to isolation from former friends.
Losing your support network.
Yeah. And just the public knowledge of your financial status can lead to constant scrutiny, feeling like every move is thoroughly examined.
Whereas avoiding display
Helps maintain a sense of independence. It helps you avoid the pressure to conform, allowing you to live life on your own terms without feeling judged all the time.
and kind of ironically, trying so hard to look successful can actually backfire.
Totally. It can make you look insecure, or people might perceive you as just materialistic, completely undermining the image you were trying so hard to project in the first place.
It erodes social capital,
Hmm.
makes relationships feel transactional.
Yeah. While having wealth obviously brings opportunities, the sources argue that openly displaying it can inadvertently cost you some of your most valuable non-financial assets.
Hmm.
Genuine connections, privacy, peace of mind.
And there's a specific psychological thing. The sources mention sudden wealth syndrome, SWS.
Right, SWS. It's described as a type of distress that affects individuals who come into large sums of money suddenly, like lottery winners, inheritors, maybe startup founders who exit big.
What does it feel like?
It's often described as a kind of psychological state or identity crisis. People can feel overwhelmed.
What are the symptoms?
Things like feeling isolated from former friends, feeling guilty about their good fortune, and experiencing this extreme fear of losing the money.
Wow. Anxiety about managing it all.
Exactly. Feeling overwhelmed by the difficulties of managing their new wealth. And crucially, the sources note that showy displays of wealth can attract unwanted attention and significantly worsen the psychological and social problems associated with SWS.
So being discreet is actually recommended for people who suddenly get rich.
It's key advice, which is further proof that just showing off wealth isn't always beneficial and can actually be harmful.
Okay, so if showing off has all these significant costs, financial, psychological, social, what's the alternative? What does this wisdom of quiet wealth actually look like in practice?
It's really built on some core principles. The first, and maybe most obvious, is discreetness and privacy. Intentionally keeping financial success quiet is presented as a strategic protection from all those risks we just discussed, the financial predators, excessive social expectations, and unnecessary stress.
It gives you independence.
Exactly. Enables independence and helps you avoid that pressure to conform.
And it seems to involve prioritizing different things.
Yes, prioritizing intrinsic value over brand prestige and quality over logos. This aligns with sound financial sense too, right? Focusing on long-term utility and cost-effectiveness, rather than just flashy symbols that lose value super fast.
And the focus shifts from looking wealthy to actually being financially secure.
Absolutely, that's fundamental. True financial well-being is built on the basics: savings, investments, and smart spending.
It's about the long game.
Prioritizing long-term financial independence over short-term pleasures. Accumulating wealth so you can use it purposefully. Avoiding that trap of lifestyle creep where your spending just automatically rises to meet your income.
And avoiding the flaunting seems to change the nature of your relationships too.
It really does. It helps ensure your relationships are built on authenticity, not financial status, fostering genuine connections based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than just who can buy what for whom.
So those are the principles. What about the practical steps? How do you actually build this quiet wealth? The sources seem to lay out a clear path.
They do. First, you absolutely have to know your income and budget. Understand your net pay, what's actually coming in.
Budgeting is key.
Having a clear budget, maybe using something like the 50-30-20 rule, 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings and debt repayment, is essential for living within your means.
And tracking spending, really being honest about needs versus wants.
That's crucial. Even though the sources admit it's often the hardest part of budgeting, that distinction between finite needs and potentially infinite wants.
Okay, budgeting first, then what?
Then you have to prioritize savings. The fundamental rule is pay yourself first.
What does that mean exactly?
It means ensuring money goes into your savings or investment accounts before you pay other bills or spend it on discretionary stuff.
Make it automatic.
Ideally, yeah. Experts generally recommend building an emergency fund first, covering maybe 3 to 12 months of living expenses, just for security.
And automating savings and investments is really helpful.
Totally. Consistency is way more valuable than trying to perfectly time the market or chasing short-term returns.
Which leads to investing.
Right. Smart investing is how you grow wealth over time, harnessing the Magic of compound interest. Again, consistent investing, maybe investing every time you get paid, is how quiet wealth gets built through good habits.
And savvy investors aren't just chasing huge returns.
Not usually. They calculate risk-adjusted returns. They prioritize capital preservation. Basically, not losing money is often more important than hitting home runs. And understanding passive income streams.
Ah, the money on Wi-Fi you earn in your sleep idea.
That's the one. The sources call it the ninth wonder of the world. It's a big part of building long-term security.
What about debt?
Debt management is critical. Prioritizing and eliminating high-interest consumer debt, like credit cards, is an absolute must. It's described as toxic to wealth building.
Get rid of that first.
Definitely. Managing other debts like student loans is also important. Some debt, like maybe a mortgage on an appreciating asset, might be acceptable, but you still need to consider minimizing it or whether you could get better returns investing elsewhere.
And finally, the sources really emphasize continuous financial education.
Yeah, you can't just set it and forget it entirely. Staying informed about taxes, markets, general economic news, and being willing to adapt your plans is crucial because, well, life happens. Markets change, interest rates fluctuate, and personal circumstances shift.
What's really powerful here is how the sources connect these very practical financial strategies, budgeting, saving, investing, managing debt directly to psychological well-being.
They absolutely do. They argue that these strategies actually enable the pursuit of intangible happiness. Like experiences, relationships, aligning your life with your values. Financial security gives you the freedom to invest in things that bring lasting happiness, not just that fleeting satisfaction from buying stuff.
So, understanding what truly satisfies you, knowing your needs versus wants, knowing your values actually reinforces the good financial habits.
It creates this virtuous cycle. Financial health supports psychological well-being, which in turn strengthens the behavior that builds wealth and enhances overall life satisfaction. It's really the opposite of that negative cycle of insecurity and display we talked about earlier.
This leads naturally into cultivating a full life that's about more than just accumulating stuff, right?
Exactly. Prioritizing experiences, relationships, personal growth, that's key. The sources note that investing in experiences like travel or hobbies often brings longer happiness than spending on items. Things fade, experiences stick with you.
A full life means spending time doing things you love with people you love.
Fundamentally, yes. True satisfaction comes from meeting those deeper psychological needs for connection, purpose, and meaning. Prioritizing personal growth over just acquiring more material goods.
And living within your means is just non-negotiable for this.
Absolutely fundamental. Developing a mindset of living well with less is essential. And again, consciously learning the difference between your finite needs and your potentially infinite wants that's presented as often the hardest part of budgeting, but it's totally core to this whole philosophy.
And crucially, aligning your financial goals with your personal values seems essential for genuine satisfaction.
It really is. Clarifying your why. What's the motivation behind your financial goals? Is it retirement security, providing for family, supporting a cause you care about? Basing your financial decisions on those values prevents you from becoming, as the sources put it, a prisoner to the money chase.
True wealth, then, is defined more as freedom.
Freedom, exactly. Choosing how to spend your time, your energy, who you spend it with. That freedom, combined with focusing on your personal values, leads to a richer, more fulfilled life.
And we talked about how flaunting wealth brings scrutiny and attracts the wrong people.
Right. Undermining privacy. Quiet wealth, on the other hand, actively protects your personal and financial security.
It offers freedom from judgment.
Allows you to live on your own terms. Practicing quiet wealth is presented as a deliberate act of rejecting social comparison and that whole keeping up race.
It's like a defense mechanism.
The sources position it that way, yeah. A defense against the constant external pressures from social media, from advertising.
So by choosing discretion, valuing intrinsic worth, you regain control.
You regain control over how you see yourself, the nature of your relationships. It makes you less susceptible to manipulation and pressure. It's not just about the money. It's about cultivating personal autonomy and psychological resilience.
Now, while these psychological drivers and financial principles seem pretty broadly applicable, It's important to recognize that attitudes towards displaying wealth aren't universal, right?
Absolutely not. They're deeply rooted in cultural, historical, and even sociopolitical contexts.
So that intense drive to display we've discussed might show up differently depending on where you are in the world or the history of that particular place.
Exactly. History matters hugely. For example, the sources mention that back in 16th, 17th century Europe, things like mercantilism and Calvinist beliefs meant that conspicuous display of goods was stigmatized. It was seen as wasteful or sinful.
Okay.
But then the Industrial Revolution came along, created a new reality, and suddenly displaying wealth became tied to upward mobility for the ambitious middle class. Economic shifts clearly change cultural views on this stuff.
And the sources specifically pull out the post-Soviet context as a really powerful example of this cultural influence.
They really do. In the Soviet Union, remember, there was this official ideological rejection of wealth. The emphasis was all on equality, collectivism.
Right.
Financial opportunities were severely limited under the state-controlled economy, and there was very little room for personal affairs, often forcing conformity. The focus was meant to be on collective material development, not individual wealth accumulation.
And then the collapse of the USSR just dramatically flipped that script.
Overnight, you had this rapid, sometimes chaotic transition to capitalism that led to growth in capitalism and entrepreneurship, expanding financial opportunities for some.
But also creating huge inequality.
Significant growing income inequality, yeah. And alongside that, consumerism just exploded.
Right.
Consumerism and materialism became more prevalent, with people increasingly prioritizing luxury items and travel. And this was heavily influenced, the sources argue, by the rise of groups they describe as the New Russians.
Who were they?
Often young, crime-connected entrepreneurs without much education who suddenly had money and became new trendsetters, shifting the culture towards money, material success, sex, and violence. A very different vibe.
And this resulted in relatively higher levels of conspicuous consumption in these transitioning post-communist countries, places like Ukraine included.
That's what the research suggests. Why?
Yeah.
Well, the sources point to a few things. That extreme income inequality, strong existing social ties where status matters a lot, and just the desire for the nouveau riche, the newly rich, to show off wealth that was previously condemned or impossible to attain.
That just burst out.
This behavior, according to the sources, appeared immediately and violently after the fall of communism. It became a new, powerful marker of social status in that vacuum.
So while the sources might have limited direct comparative data specifically on, say, Ukrainian attitudes versus elsewhere,
the general post-Soviet trends are highly relevant. You saw Kiev getting high-end stores catering to the wealthy class pretty quickly after independence. That reflects that broader cultural shift towards consumerism and displaying wealth.
the contrast with the Soviet past must have been incredibly stark.
Profound. It was a massive cultural and psychological reevaluation. After decades where individualism was suppressed, openly displaying wealth in these societies wasn't just about showing off money. It served as this powerful, almost defiant statement.
A statement of what?
Individual success, freedom within the new capitalist system, a radical departure from the communist past, embracing a new, previously forbidden form of social mobility and individual achievement.
It sounds almost like a way for a new class to carve out an identity and status, maybe even overcompensating for past deprivation or that lack of individual agency.
That's a very plausible interpretation based on the sources,
Yeah.
So in these contexts, displaying wealth carries this extra layer of meaning. It's potentially more intense, more freighted with significance than in established Western economies where that history is different.
And this obviously presents specific challenges for adopting quiet wealth principles in these regions, doesn't it?
It really does. That cultural memory of collectivism and state control might, kind of ironically, make immediate visible consumption more appealing as a form of validation or even overcompensation. Plus, if there isn't a strong existing cultural tradition of individual financial literacy, long-term personal financial planning, or that kind of cautious wealth accumulation.
There's less foundation to build on.
Exactly. There's less groundwork for adopting quiet wealth principles. It requires a deeper cultural shift, not just economic liberalization.
So in these transitioning societies, intensified display isn't just personal vanity. It can be seen as a sort of compensatory means of social rehabilitation, identity formation.
Even for marginalized groups finding new ways to assert themselves.
Precisely.
And the lack of established norms for discrete wealth management makes people potentially more susceptible to all the pitfalls of flaunting that we've discussed. The financial risks, the psychological toll, the social dangers.
Understanding that cultural backdrop is really vital for a complete picture then.
Absolutely essential.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really contrasted these two worlds. The showy world of conspicuous consumption, often driven by psychological insecurity and relentless external pressure.
Yeah, versus the more grounded wisdom found in quiet wealth.
We've detailed the significant real costs of flaunting that financial drain from depreciation and lost investment opportunities, the heavy psychological toll of anxiety, stress, never feeling quite satisfied.
And the social dangers, too.
Hmm.
Attracting toxic relationships, alienating genuine friends, losing privacy.
And on the flip side, we've highlighted the pretty compelling benefits of discretion and smart financial management, increased security, genuine freedom, the foundation for authentic relationships, and really a pathway to true well-being.
Ultimately, the sources really lead us towards this conclusion that true wealth isn't what you show the world. It's the security and freedom that come from managing your money wisely.
So this deep dive is kind of encouraging a conscious shift, maybe, away from seeking external validation through stuff.
Towards cultivating internal fulfillment. Through experiences, meaningful relationships, personal growth.
It really sounds like it boils down to aligning your financial decisions and your goals with your deepest personal values. Making sure your wealth, however much or little, serves as a tool for a fulfilling life, not becoming an end in itself, or worse, a source of chronic dissatisfaction and insecurity.
Exactly. The path to genuine financial freedom and long-term well-being isn't found in that relentless pursuit of more visible things. It's in wisely managing what you have, combined with a deep understanding of what genuinely enriches your life. It's about building a life based on true independence, not external validation.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. In a world that is constantly telling you to show off, often by, frankly, exploiting your deepest psychological needs to get you to do so, what does true wealth really mean for you? What are the things that genuinely enrich your life beyond anything that could ever be visible to others?